everyone, and welcome to episode 8 of the Crossing Zebras TV show. Tonight we are doing Faction Warfare Part 2. We've got some great guests. We didn't quite cover all we wanted to last time, so without further ado, here are the guests this evening, bringing them onto the stream for you right now. Yes, it worked fantastic. Let's allow them to speak by bringing up the sound. I, of course, am Apothne, your regular host. I'm a member of Pandemic Legion of Sniggerly. I'm an Alliance Tournament commentator. I do a bunch of other things in EVE too, but let's move on from me. Who are the rest of you?
Well, good afternoon. My name is Veskrashen. I've been flying with the Galente Militia since 2013 with Justify Chaos and the Spaceship Bebop Alliance, and my main focus is the occupancy warfare part of Faction Warfare.
My name is Juliana Souter, and I've been playing the game since about 2007. Since 2009 or so, I've been focused more on faction warfare. I'm currently the executor of GMVA, the Blur Accords, and CEO of Moyer Corporation.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Desiderya. I'm CEO of Firefalcon, Defense and Security. It's multicultural of 1 Brigade's Executor Corp, and I've also been part of faction warfare on both war zones for like 3 to 4 years, and I like to explode things, basically.
Fantastic. So, friends, as I said, we're here to discuss faction warfare, all the joys and troubles that it currently has. But first, in the same order, what have you been flying this week, and what would you like to fly next week?
So this week we've been doing actually a major assault on the Caldari system, so I've been flying a lot of Tristans and Harpies and Algoses and Zealots. And then next week, I don't know, let's find something new and interesting, maybe an Ashimo.
For myself, basically the same thing that Vesk was doing right now. I was logged in for the past 3 hours on Psychojari, so lots of fun flying Algoses, Tristans. Harpies are really great, though. Awesome. Love Harpies. And Tecate hopefully next week.
Well, I have to say Kestrels because they are the best. Technically, only things that can fit more than one scram because faction warfare. And no, I've been enjoying the Firetail recently. Cheap prices are good. Keep up the good work. And yeah, I think it will be the same for next week. Actually, I will fly the Jackdaw a bit, hopefully in a bigger setup.
Okay, if the background noise is terrible from my microphone friends, please let me know in the stream chat, because I've got my window open because it's 1,000,000 degrees in England, and thus closing the window with a 1,002 degree computer in my room, I might die. So we're trying to avoid that, but still. So last week we had we were blogged by the Galente Militia, as they do. This week we have some representation from Southern Faction Warfare from Desk. So Desk, please deliver to us the state of Amar Minmatar Faction Warfare as it stands at the moment.
Well, right now, Amar Militia, or in this case us, is more or less in a situation where we are technically losing the war zone. We're on the losing side, but yet we are kind of winning because we tend to win all the fights. We tend to win most of the engagements, especially the big ones, and we focus on delaying any assaults from Minmatar groups and are usually bashing hub fleets like 2 to 3 times until they manage to sneak it through, and sometimes on we can't cover, or actually when we're not looking. So that is essentially what's been going on after the full metal push from Amar Militia, where we captured all the systems, mostly due to the extreme plexing power of Dirt and Glitter. We basically went into a kind of a state of hiatus where we've seen stable system rates. We were able to like farm a bit of LPs, and then slowly, of course, Warzone flips as it's prone to be. And right now, it's all full with farmer characters who are like just like running their plexes for their LP. And Minmil has been basically bashing hubs mostly like once or twice a week. It's been slower now that there are almost no systems left, so it's getting hard for them. But yeah, that will probably stay that way for a while. Until, I don't know, Russian Minmatar LP farmers switch sides to get the juicy Amar Mil LP. So, yeah, we're hanging in there. We are occupying the north and killing things that come close and occasionally running around the war zone. We're doing our business, or the Lord's work, as we are supposed to say.
Any news from Galkal area? Anything new since last week?
Well, I think the biggest thing is that we decided to go ahead and push a couple of Caldari home systems this weekend. Kajari in the northwest Black Rise area, and Tama over by Sujarento. It's kind of one of those gateway systems to Caldari HiSec. So we're doing actually 2 system pushes at the same time. It's going to be interesting to see how those go. They're both very, very bloody. Caldari has had about 1,500 ships killed in the past 24 hours, about 104 pods, according to Dotlan. And if you look at Tama, it's only about 750 ships, but about 550 pods in the past 24 hours. So lots of fights, lots of death and destruction, good times there. We'll see how things go. The Caldari have actually gotten pretty good at the whole system defense piece over the past year and a half, ever since we took the war zone, and that's been very good to see.
Okay, so one of the things I want to discuss tonight is the difference between the Caldari Gallente and the Mimitar Amar faction warfare zone. Obviously, they are under the same mechanics. They both play under the same version of the game. They're both on Tranquility, but we've got a very different scenario going on between the two. We've got a lot of fighting going on in Gallente Caldari. Gallente have had control over the region for maybe even a year now. Fair to say about a year. And then now Caldari is slowly growing, slowly coming back up, whereas Mimitar Amar, so far as I'm told, has just been almost dead for a while. No change, complete stagnation. What do you guys think could cause such a difference?
Well, if I may, I think the sizes are a big difference. I mean, the war zone is much smaller on the Amar Mimitar side, so that leaves a lot less systems. So it's easier to get high tiers and like a high number of systems. And also, probably talking about size, it's the player numbers, because Caldari Gallente has much higher population, both in militia and out of militia as well. Like local pirate groups are the big shots, so to speak, living there. Fleet size are usually better. So, and when Veskrashen talks about doing 2 system sieges at the same time, that would be impossible around here, except if you call a siege when 10 people plex a system and no one's there to mess with them.
Well, I think that's definitely part of it. The other thing is that in the Caldari Gallente war zone, you've got a history of several years of major PvP alliances, corporations on both sides living and basing in the war zone, as opposed to living in the border areas and just going in to get their fights and get their LP. You know, folks actually live in the war zone, put their stuff at risk in the war zone, and that leads to a very different character because, number one, you've actually committed to the war zone to some extent. Your fights and everything are a lot closer, your reships are a lot closer, and you've actually got stuff at risk. Because if you lose the system, you're locked out of the stations, you can't get to your stuff.
Okay, so last week we discussed the nature of faction warfare, what it actually is. This week I want to do a brief intro because we talked about it last week, but we didn't actually discuss what it is. What is the capture mechanics of faction warfare? If I am a Gallente militia person and I want to go, hey, I want to own this system currently in Caldari hands, Vesk, what do I need to do?
All right, so there's essentially there's these things called plexes, capture plexes or faction warfare plexes. They're small dead space areas that are gated. They come in 4 different sizes: novice, small, medium, large. They're all worth the same amount of points. Everything is worth 20 points. To make a system vulnerable, you have to earn 3,000 points. Okay, so every plex that I capture gets me 20 points from my side. Defensive plexing subtracts 20 points from that. I have to capture essentially 150 more complexes than the other side to make it vulnerable. Once a system is vulnerable, then I can go shoot the infrastructure hub, which is about a small pause worth of EHP. And if I do that, then at downtime, I own the system. The thing is that the different sizes of plexes mean that only certain size ships can get in. So in a novice, it's Tech 1 frigates, smalls, it's Tech 2, Tech 3 destroyers, mediums, Tech 1, Tech 2 cruisers, and then larges are everything, and they actually don't have a gate, but they're still dead space. So the situation essentially is, if it's an empty system where you see most in the Mimitar Amar zone, there's not a whole lot of opposition. But when you're assaulting a system like Kajari or Hikanema or Hasmanjala or another system where people mainly live in, it's a completely different story because they're forming fleets to defend against it. And you end up having fights over every single one of the plexes with actually different fleets. And if you've got a situation where you've got 3 or 4 plexes up at a time, then you're having fights in 2 or 3 or 4 different spots at a time. And that gets really interesting really quickly.
Fantastic. So, Julianus, why don't you introduce the first topic for us? It's labelled here as occupancy value and benefits with war zone control and living in the war zone versus on low-sec borders.
This is one of our favorite topics to banter about in militia chat and every other chat channel in the faction warfare. Basically, there's very little reason, besides what Veskrashen said, to own a system, besides to deny the enemy access to stations. Well, many of the systems don't have stations. So what's the point of taking over that system. Basically, it's just EP and pride at that point. So there needs to be more substantive benefits to capturing a system, to denying it to access to your enemies, and to generally participate in the faction warfare territorial control game. So there's a lot of different proposals about this. We were discussing some of them before the show. Some of the proposals go between like increasing the taxation benefits, reducing the office fees, reducing the amount of time it takes to produce certain materials or certain ships or ammunition, that kind of thing. Or just general other benefits like having NPCs spawn on Stargate. Some people don't agree with that because it seems to be meddling in the PvP arena a little bit too much. So there's a lot of debate. I'm sure my esteemed colleagues here will continue the discussion. So either Veskrashen or just Desiderya.
Okay, so what makes a system worthwhile? I mean, it's in the end, it's the people living there. So you've got a big war zone, you've got a lot of systems that are essentially just there, not even just the stationless systems, but also just places where no one lives because they are so far away. And that's, I think, a big problem, that all systems are technically worth the same in the faction warfare areas map, or the tier map. But the real difference is in the details, and this is all the social aspect where people decide to live. This is often strategic benefits, like the position within for logistical highways, or especially for jump drive things. But this is really the only reason why a system is worth defending. So, like the system sieges, you wouldn't get a system siege like that for basically just an empty system.
No,
Sure.
I think he's absolutely correct. The major advantage of getting in these systems is just a strategic ability to influence people's ability to move around the war zone, to be able to choke off different throughputs and different pipes. If you look at a map of the Caldari Galente war zone, for example, Iha and then Amalia and Illuri, if you take those three systems and hold those, you block off pretty much all of Placid. You add in a couple more systems over towards like Thomas Ojurento, Hadales and stuff like that, and then all of a sudden you block off all of Essence area, and now you've cut off essentially 2 or 3 of the entire regions, and then that gives you a pretty significant control over people's ability to move throughout the war zone, and especially in order to be able to do those major system pushes, because the reship times really matter when you're doing these assaults. When you talk about Tech 1 frigates, for example, you can't get more than about 9 or 10,000 EHP, so you start running 20-man fleets at each other, and Logi, and you start hitting that alpha wall where you can actually just like straight up blow ships out of the sky without having any ability to repair. So your ability to take those kinds of losses, replace those losses quickly, and get back in the fight is really, really important. So having adjacent systems where you've got that sort of jumping off point to make that assault is really, really important when you're going up against that kind of organized resistance. Even POSs are just not nearly as viable for that sort of thing, just because of the difficulty in supplying different groups from that same POS.
So would we say that the overall topology of faction warfare is that we have the problem in the Imar Minmatar section that it's just too small? There just aren't enough systems to facilitate a good scale of warfare, and in Galente Caldari that it's too constricted. There's too many key pipes, or rather there's too few key pipes, and thus control over them just means that you just won. It's just done. Just if you have control of those, then you just have won the war zone. Is that what we're saying here?
I think that's definitely part of it. If you look at the Caldari Galente zone, for example, we basically held everything that's within, we basically put the Caldari in a position where they have to go 2 jumps to reship in order to assault any of our major systems, and that's just, it doesn't sound like much, but when you're talking only 10 minutes in order to capture a novice plex, for example, every second counts. And trying to do it with disorganized groups or varied groups, it's nearly impossible to try and take something over even just that short distance. Like I said, POSs aren't really viable as far as mounting those kinds of assaults. It's just extremely difficult to organize out of a POS. Just getting the amount of ships there, because like I said, there's been 1,500 ships blown up in Gajari today alone. That's a massive amount to try and get into a POS and hand out and everything else.
That's definitely true, and particularly because Caldari is not as perhaps unified than some of the other faction warfare militias. Like Galente militia has a pretty good rapport with each other. Caldari, up until very recently, had issues with trust issues with their different groups. So having a control tower where you had to share the password between the different alliances probably would not have worked out that great for Caldari. So their offensive pushes have been extremely limited, and they've been playing a largely defensive game, as we mentioned. So in order to improve the occupancy benefits and what would generate more content for us. There really does need to be a serious look from CCP at the functionality of upgrades, or whether or not you should delete the tier system, how you upgrade systems at the infrastructure hub, and maybe having like things you can plug into the infrastructure hubs like you would have a nullsec or something to specialize the system. I don't know. There's multiple ways you could go at this. It just really needs to be significantly overhauled, because right now the content is sort of basically us making the fights happen, which is good, but you really have to bring in some additional justification from the gameplay mechanics to enhance it further.
Yeah.
So one of the other topics we want to look at specifically when we talk about where we live and where we stage is living specifically in the war zone where your assets are at risk, and living on the borders. So you can stay in high sec where logistics is significantly easier. Your station can't be overtaken by the enemy. What are our thoughts about living in the war zone and living on the low sec borders? And should we try to have more mechanics that force you to specifically live in the war zone?
I think yes. It is a bit of a challenge to for small groups, especially, to supply themselves in lowsec, especially with prices for third-party jump freighter services and so on rising. But it's possible, and I think if there would be mechanics in place that makes it easier for small groups to live there, it would be better. Because from my experience, both like as a CEO of a bigger corp, which is living in lowsec, and in the beginning we were really small. You get so much more content out of it. If you sit, your ship splitting times when you're not out in a fleet, if you sit in low sec, you see people coming into your system. That's basically your content right there. So you can undock, you can hunt them, and you wouldn't get the same thing in high sec. So that's, I think, it's already a really good call for people. With the risk being so high of being locked out of stations, I'm not sure if that's a big issue, except like on the rare key systems where you block out 50 people out of their toys.
So perhaps there needs to be game mechanics that sort of help people live in lowsec have been discussed from time to time. Industry is one of those, but nobody really wants to do industry. That's not really a fun mechanic. And it doesn't really solve the problem either. You still have to get the minerals there, you have to get the modules there. You can't just poof everything into existence inside a lowsec trade hub, for example. One of the major differences between Galente, Caldari, and Amara and Mimitar is that there are several trade hubs in lowsec now that are forming naturally based on player activity. So in order to do something similar on the scale for Mimitar and Amara, I have no clue. So it really is a head-scratcher to fix that problem. I'm hoping that Veskrashen can lend us some wisdom on this topic.
Well, I don't know if I've got a whole lot of wisdom. I think one observation is that the people that are based out of the sort of border systems in the high sec and low sec systems next to the war zone tend to be the ones that are more PvE oriented as opposed to PvP oriented. They tend to be the mission runners. They tend to be the farmers. The folks who really want to do PvP need to base out of the war zone simply because that's where the fights are. Logistics is a difficulty. I think that if we did get some sort of benefit to low sec industry in the faction warfare zones, that would really, really help. Obviously, getting minerals and stuff in is a difficulty, but thanks to the compression and everything else and jump freighter service, it's not as difficult as a lot of people would think. You can stick about, I don't know, a few hundred frigates worth of minerals inside of a single deep space transport run, and those aren't hard to get around. If there were like industry benefits in terms of like material usage, specifically in faction warfare zones based on the upgrades that only apply to faction warfare corporations, that would be a very interesting mechanic, because it's not easy to flip from Caldari to Galente, for example, because of the standings issues. So if you got a Caldari faction warfare corporation that's doing industry, and your system gets captured by the Galente, well, now you're not getting the same benefits. Now your stuff is locked in the system, and you'd have to swap to a completely different alt corporation, which is a significantly more difficult task than just flopping over to another alt to do emissions on. But I think that, yeah, the biggest issue is you need to be able to encourage people to live and base in lowsec. You need to make it the logistics viable. You need to be able to promote those lowsec trade hubs. And major props to Sugar Kyle, our faction warfare and lowsec rep, for sort of popularizing that idea of making lowsec markets a big thing and supplying stuff at a relatively reasonable cost as opposed to just ripping everybody off. It makes it a lot more of a healthy sort of environment to fly around in and base yourself out of.
I mean, when I was still in Waffles, we obviously lived in Galkal Lowsec, up in the northeast, I guess you would call it. And we just had an in-house jump freighter service. I mean, personally, well, I'm sure this is absolutely a problem for you. We had like 10 guys do jump freighter runs, and you just bolt stuff in Jita on an alt. They jump freighter it down for like 100 ISK per meter cubed. Like, really cheap, really easy, just cover the cost of fuel. But obviously, it's definitely a concern for Corps. You know, if you've got 20 guys and they're pretty new, they can't afford a jump freighter, and even if they can afford one, and maybe that one guy has it, so that one guy is then responsible for supplying 20 dudes worth of stuff, and that becomes a real-time job rather than distributing it over a full team. So moving on, we've got this topic of Warzone topography. We touched on this before, and how it's different between the Amarr Minmatar and the Gallente Caldari. What do you think promotes interesting topography for action warfare? What do you think promotes variances in gameplay and variances in style? What do you like to see from the topography in your Warzone? So are there any specific pockets that you guys particularly like to fight in?
I think there's a lot of different good spots to get PvP in the Gallente Caldari Warzone at the moment. You could go to the Panacasta Hitkoken bottleneck, which basically divides in half the west and east sides of faction warfare. You could do gate camps there. You could do roaming gangs. You could do little bait assassination traps, basically. Or you could go to Tama, which is where, Snuffbox and everybody used to hang out, but now they've moved down to Rocket Pass. But you can get any range of PvP getting dropped by Titan hot drops, getting attacked by Black Ops, being attacked by massive amounts of heavy assault cruisers. And now we have offensives going on where we get little pockets of like 1,500 ships destroyed per day to liven things up once in a while. So that's quite good too. I don't know anything about Gallente Amarr Minmatar, so please, Desiderya.
Yeah, I mean, you've mentioned like pipes, the pipes dividing the Calgal Warzone. That is obviously good if you want to control it. It's also bad for smaller groups, because if you're not part of the the gate camping fleet, then no one else can come through, which is, of course, the whole goal of the matter. But this is what I think makes for small gang stuff, or for like solo pro PvP, whatever, what makes Metropolis and the whole Amarr Minmatar Warzone a bit more attractive, because you can just circumvent these kind of gate camps, because there are at least enough pipes to have one or two options aside your main route. So what makes it interesting? It's difficult, because we've got, especially like right now, we've got empty swathes of space where simply no one is. So you don't go there to fight. You don't go really into the south of the Warzone at the moment, except like one or two systems. So I reiterate early on what makes it interesting topography-wise. It's where people live. So you've got mostly your high-sec border systems where people like to stage. So that's, I guess, where most of the activity is based around. As for us, we are essentially in a pocket at the ascent of the Warzone. We initially went there and made it our own, and we still hold it. It's one of the two real pockets of resistance in the entire Amarr militia. And so if Minmatars are listening in here, go to us and come bring us a fight. We'd like to do so. It's getting a bit boring sometimes, but yeah, well, please don't bring any stabs. We get twitches.
Right. So I think that, the biggest thing is like Des said, it's where people are living, and that's just part of low-sec in general. Things that make things really interesting are their neighboring station systems that are on kind of a pipe, like the NEA EHA used to be, or what was a good one, like Rocket Pass, which is dead in the middle of everything. There's not a couple of systems, stations within a couple of systems, but that was a really interesting place as well, just because you got so much stuff flowing through. But staging on those pipes is really, really gets you a lot of fights. Lillereer, which is sort of a traditional Gallente home, is on like 3 or 4 different major routes through the Warzone, and that gives us all kinds of interesting fights.
Right, for sure. Lillereer provides immediate access to at least 3 different constellations. So if somebody's scouted to be seen in a constellation over there, you form up the fleet in 5 minutes, undock, warp to the Aldernate Gate, and then jump through to chase down the Sons of Guns there. And so what I might say is, like, I think folks need to start reconsidering where they position their corporations, where they are putting their people. If you're getting people that are getting bored, if your players are getting inactive because there's not enough PvP going on, you really need to think about where to put your dudes. Like, have a move operation, get some Akators or some deep space transports. Deep space transports are really good, by the way. They actually fix those things. They're actually pretty damn good for large hauling that's not freighter-sized. And you could basically fit, like, frigates and destroyers into those things, no problem, and haul them down for a couple days of operations. you don't have to risk too much effort that way.
Yeah, so I think I'm on tap to talk next about fights and defended systems. So this is a big thing that's been a major sort of feature of the Caldari Glinta Warzone for the past year and a half, couple of years actually, is this idea of major system sieges. Whenever you're talking about assaulting or defending a system where you're living and basing in, the defenders actually have quite a bit of an advantage. It may not necessarily seem that way from the beginning, but you actually do have quite a bit of an advantage. People will talk a lot of times in our area about the Derptron, which is the Tech 1 Metafit MWD brawling blaster Atron, and people laughed at it because this is 1.5 mil 2 million S boat that we started using a couple years ago. But the thing is that they kick out a lot of DPS, and they're incredibly tough for their size and cost, which means that if you go into a Plex, you've got 20 dies and we've only got 10. Well, obviously, if we warp in on you, we're all going to die. That's fine. My station's right here. Yours is a jump or 2 jumps away. So we go in with those 10 Atrons. We kill 3 or 4 of you. We immediately reship. We come back in. Your guys are still flying back to the station. Now it's 10 on 16. So we kill another 8 guys. Reship, and we come in something good this time, something maybe kitier and longer distance. Now it's our 10 guys against your 8 guys, while your other 12 guys are still reshipping. Now we can take the Plex, establish superiority. We have the positional advantage because you're always going to be warping into a certain spot within the Plex. So we dictate range as the defenders. And then we can tear you apart piece by piece and hold that Plex. We did that quite a lot when Test was in the Warzone. Pretty much refined our tactics incredibly well as far as that attrition, followed by the control of the Plex from range. The Caldari have sort of adopted a lot of those tactics. They've got a lot of the fleet counts that we've used. So numbers really matter here. But again, if you can adopt that attrition mindset of all I have to do is kill enough of you to force you to get off field, you can maintain control of the system. Because remember, it's a race to 150 plexes. You as the attacker have to capture 150 more plexes than the defender does. So every one that I can manage to cap is another 2 that you have to capture. One to make up for the one that I capped, and then the one that you're trying to cap from there. In addition, plex sizes also really matter. So if you're fighting somebody who's bringing hacks all the time, like, I don't know, Glinta, for example, we're only going to be able to get into medium and large plexes. Well, that means all the smalls and the novices we can't contest unless we ship down. If you do that, then since the smalls and the novices only have 10 and 15-minute timers as opposed to 20-minute timers, there's going to be a lot more of those that spawn over the next few days than mediums and larges. So you can actually make progress in defending your system just by flying smaller stuff than we can do. So there turns out to be quite a few number of decisions you have to make as an FC, either on the assaulting or defending side, as far as which plexes you defend, which comps you bring out, how much attrition you're willing to tolerate, and the logistics of that become massively important. Jump freightering in 120 frigates is only going to last you maybe 2 hours during the fight. It's it comes down to that. We were talking.
I think that's really nice. I really like systems of EVE design where those decisions are important, where there isn't just one way to tackle a problem, where your opponent has a lot of options and you have a lot of options. So instead of just throwing 50 dudes at each other in the same considered optimal fleet comp, you can go, I'm going to take it from this angle. If he does this, I can do that. If he does this, I can do that. And there is no winning option. Like, focusing novices is not the way to win faction warfare. Focusing medians is not the way to win faction warfare. There is no way specifically of one action that allows you to win faction warfare. It's these changes of choices and changes of decisions is something I really like about how faction warfare is designed at the moment. Des, do you agree with that?
Kinda, yeah. I mean, the Plex system is, for the size restrictions, it's really good. It gets a bit of a problem when you start making some headway and there's only one Plex available because you have the time. But it rewards organization. This is what makes it harder for the attacker, because it's good if you can stage in the system next door, but this also means you are looking at like 3 minutes, at least 3 minutes of time until you are reshipped and back in system. So this is a lot of extra time for the attacker, for the defenders to make progress. So there's also this thing with these sieges is that you have to be on the ball the entire time. So when you do a system siege, you just can't make like, okay, let's attack 3 hours in the afternoon, and then we call it a day, and we'll continue tomorrow, because your work will be undone by 1 to 2 people if you don't care. So this is kind of more of the problematic aspect of it, in a way that it's taking so much time and it requires so much people and organization at the same level that it's really, really a big grind mean, the consequences are big for the people if they lose their system. So it is something which is okay for super defended home systems, because technically, I mean, attackers will get something out of it. You go there because you want to shoot people in the face, and they are lining themselves up, and you can shoot each other in the face. So there's something. It is much more straining for these worthless systems, as we've discussed earlier, I think.
Right.
Yeah, but I think that's actually part of what makes it cool, is that you as the players decide which systems are valuable, which systems are not. If I choose to live in a place, I have decided that that is a valuable system. If it's in the middle of nowhere, it doesn't freaking matter. There's a lot of people that complain about the issue of farmers running around the war zone and capturing these plexes, and how much of a pain in the butt it is to try and chase them around when they get like 5 stabs. And people want to make a lot of modifications to how the plexes are captured in order to make it easier to chase down these guys. But because no one lives there, or no one lives next door, they've essentially already decided as players that those systems are not valuable. And if the plexes that are getting captured don't lead to a system that's valuable getting flipped, then honestly, at least in my opinion, they're not really valuable. It doesn't matter. You can flip that thing back and forth all over the place, and it's not going to make a difference to the control of the war zone tiers or anything else.
I think that's something where the war zones are really, really different, because as we've talked about a bit before, the Amar Winmatar war zone is really, really governed a lot by random people plexing for their ISK, and not by organizations doing system pushes and so on. So what happens is, even in our systems where we live, people are, in bed or doing some other stuff. If we go out roaming, for example, and we come back, then there have been a couple of people who have been running plexes in our system. I mean, that's no threat, but it also means someone has to spend the exact same amount of time in there to undo their work. And this is okay if it's your home system, because, okay, you can just do it. But if you want to extend a bit, like a couple of systems around, 1-2 jumps, not even like huge swathes of space, it can get a real pain in the ass, because these people, they don't want to fight. I mean, if you fix warp core stabs, they would just warp off when you enter on grid. So that wouldn't fix the issue. But it also means there's a lot of pressure that is just people, wanting to make money. They don't actually want to push these systems. It's not their decision to go there to, pressure you. They just do something that is completely disconnected from what you want to do, and yet they have an impact on you. That's kind of the whole problem with the whole farmer discussion, I think. If someone wants to make their money in low sec doing whatever, it's not a problem.
So one of the ideas that have been brought up is changing the Plex mechanics slightly, so that if you're in a Plex doing it and getting the benefit from it, you have an effect on you, similar to the effect proposed in the Intosis module. Whether that's having to fit a specific module, or whether it's just a natural effect like a bubble going up, is that if you are actively doing the Plex, you cannot warp off. So every 30 seconds, or every minute, or every 5 minutes, there is some cycling where, do you want to continue doing this Plex, or do I keep this module activated, or whatever. If you click less, you cannot warp off your ship for the next X amount of time until the Plex is done. Do you think that is a good idea? Do you think that's a poor idea? What do you think of a mechanic similar to that?
I think it's a poor idea, because plexes are really good catalysts for getting fights, and you get enough of people who want to make their LP for money, and they actually also want to fight people. You get small groups, like 2 to 3 people running around, and they want to fight your 2 or 3 people, or however many you want to bring, and this is good. But if you force a mechanic where basically you force someone to be in a Plex, in a gimped ship, where they have to fit a module that wouldn't otherwise be on a PvP fit, I think that's a bad design.
Now, I got to agree. I think you've already got that mechanic to some degree in place, in that you have to be within 30 kilometers of the capture point in order to actually influence the Plex. I think that the changes that they brought in with the Phoebe expansion, where the tanks on the NPCs were significant enough that you actually had to fit guns and damage to be able to do it, was a great little solution, because it meant that you had to actually fit for damage. You couldn't just kill the NPC, warp off, and then put your ult in there to run it down. You actually had to commit something that had guns on it and everything else. Now, of course, you can use stabs and stuff like that, and that's can be a bit of an issue, but at least you force people to interact with the Plex on a regular basis. I think if you increase the tank, especially in the smalls and the mediums a bit, and maybe even on the larges, that would make it harder to fit stabs and be effective. But I think that also just kind of makes brawling fits more viable, because they do more damage, and it definitely penalizes kiting fits. I think that as far as the mechanics of capturing the Plexes go, those are about on point. A guy that's in a stab ship is never going to stop me from taking a Plex that I want, for example, which is where I think that some of the So my heartache comes in is, they're running around capturing these plexes, but they're not going to keep me from capturing it if I want to. Julius, if you want to go talk about the timers and changes and how those might work, that might be good too.
Yeah, there's been several talking points that people have swirled around about timers. Basically, at the moment, every plex has a timer you have to run down through your side. You have to be within 30 kilometers of the warping point of the beacon, rather, and you have to kill the NPC consecutively to keep the timer running. The timer duration changes based on the size of plex. It goes up as the plex size increases, as you might suspect. There is an issue where this is a huge boredom factor for the war zone, because you sit around and you're waiting for half an hour with nothing going on inside the large outpost. So there is a lot of concern about that. Like, well, should there be game content that is really this boring? Well, I'm not sure if I can answer that question at the moment. Some people have suggested that the way to solve the age-old farmer problem is that if the farmer warps away from the plex, the timer should be reset on some accelerated rate. That the offensive plexing farmer, he tries to run down the timer for 5 minutes. He warps away because he sees somebody on directional scan, because that's what they do. And then when he comes back, he realizes he's lost his 5 minutes of progress, basically. So that's an option that's interesting, but many people have different opinions about it. I believe you, Veskrashen, have mentioned some negative thoughts about this.
Yeah, at least in my opinion, that's not a good mechanic, especially when you start talking again like the system pushes. All you would need to do as a defender would just be block people out of a plex, and then you don't even have to run it yourself, and that plex stays there. You would have to commit nothing as a defender in order to run down the plexes, and you could essentially stop all progress if there was that kind of a reset mechanic in place. Even if you had something where there was a accelerated rate, if there's no bad guys in there, that resets it to 0, so you can start running it at your own time, that still massively penalizes the attacker and gives you way too much of an advantage as a defender in a situation where you've already got the positional and reship logistic advantage as it is. About the only sort of change to timers that I could see would be a dual timer mechanic, where if the capture time is, for example, 20 minutes, then if you're in there as a good guy, it goes up. If you're in there as a bad guy, it goes up, both at the same rate. And whoever hits that 20-minute point the first is the one that captures that plex. That at least would put a situation where it's equal time and equal effort by both sides. So if I'm warping into a plex where the bad guys have been in there for 8 minutes out of a 10-minute timer, I don't have to spend 18 minutes in there. I only have to spend 10. I think that would go a long way to sort of equalizing the effort to capture plexes without making one side or the other have too big of an advantage.
I agree. Like a cumulative system where it accumulates time as long as you're in control of the site, and then if you're driven out, the time is saved, but the other team has to build up their cumulative timer. So that way, at least it eliminates some of the boredom factor, because a lot of the boredom that's involved isn't so much about doing the base duration of time. It's about doing your base duration of time plus the other 18 minutes that the warp core stabbed farmer was sitting inside the plex. There's absolutely no reason for you to be there for 48 minutes inside a large outpost if the system's only 50% contested. You get no loyalty points out of it. You get no financial gain, no standings gain. You're sitting there for 48 minutes in a completely vulnerable location in space. So you really need to reconsider that option. I think that would be agreeable to CCP. The only problem that is visible to me is the coding of it. They had enough issue trying to code the timers the first time, so adding more timers could be problematic.
I think both ideas have merit. I mean, the rollback makes sense in a way that, especially if you manage to put a delay on it, say like after 2-3 minutes or something of no one being there, and it starts rolling back to neutral. The dual timer is also interesting. For those who don't know that, when someone has run up a plex fight by 5 minutes and you start deplexing it, you have to run his 5 minutes down before your timer starts counting. So a dual timer setup would basically mean you get into a plex that was 1 minute from being finished, and you can be happy about it that you flushed someone out so close to getting his reward, and then you just have to spend 39 minutes there. And with a dual timer setup, you just have to spend 20 minutes. So that's a net win, and I think that is also valid. The main goal for a timer rollback would be that if you chase someone out and he decides not to fight, or there's a grace period, for example, to get a fleet that is in system, it can get reorganized and actually go back into a plex. If you have this grace period and then it rolls back, you can... Sorry, guys. My thoughts. yeah, you force someone out, and he runs away. He's not there anymore. He doesn't want to fight for it. He just goes to the next system, does his business there. He essentially said, no, I don't want to fight for this complex. So a mechanism like a timer rollback or something similar would encourage people fighting for the plexus. This is much better than a mechanic that denies warp core steps or something, because, like we discussed earlier, you would just have people running away anyways. So making it harder to run away doesn't necessarily mean there is less of random farming or whatever going on, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, lots of these discussions revolve around how do you solve the farmer problem, how do you penalize, the one dude running around in circles continuously. And this used to be a much bigger issue back when the Troll Scepter could run at Plex AFK for, with no problem whatsoever for months on end. So fortunately we have progressed. We've made progress from each patch that CCP has done for faction warfare incrementally. And now we're just trying to get this last little problem resolved where faction warfare plexes are still being done in vast quantities by people that are just there to farm the money. Let's admit it, that when there is something that is valuable in EVE Online, people will find a way to farm it effectively. There's never a complete solution to that problem, but there are ways to make the PvP and the sovereignty or the control mechanics a little bit more enjoyable, a little bit more fun. And that could be removing a lot of the faction warfare, troll atrions with blasters and warp core stabs from the game, hopefully. Maybe the dual timer would be good, because at least then we could close down the Plex quickly without having to waste all your time with it. That'd be good. So.
Yeah, I mean, that's the main thing. The mechanics should drive conflict. Plex mechanics are great for that, but they have their shortcomings in a way that, as we discussed earlier. So any focus on that? I don't know. I think it's a good thing, whether it's a timer rollback or a dual timer or something else. We should spend our time shooting each other or hunting people and not watching a button count up. So that's that. And I do understand, like Wes questions, concerns about making a system attack more harder. I think there should be mechanics in place that make it a bit, make it easier to attack systems. Separate them. Type of Plex, for example, that is focused on fleets, where you have to, like. I don't know, where you just have to bring more DPS to the field in order to break something, or which you are not able to farm. So you make a bigger bump in a vulnerability. So you force people to fleet up, you force people to go somewhere and have an impact on it. And also, I don't know, I think this is what mechanics should be for. On the same time, you can make home systems more a bit more easier defended in a new system, obviously not in the current state, where if you have people living there and they invest something into it, like into the iHub, like special benefits, like you've discussed earlier. Yeah. I mean,
well, yeah, like anything could be done to make a home system more interesting. At the moment, we just sit around in Vlia there, and we literally only undock from Vlia there to kill people. We don't do anything else besides PvP inside Vlia. Maybe one or two people do like exploration sites, but there's literally only a certain amount of money making you can get in low-sec at the moment. So living in low-sec has no money-making capability besides for what faction warfare offers. And faction warfare is pretty boring at the moment in terms of money-making. Doing plexes is boring. Doing missions are broken. Missions are pretty much broken for the Galente Caldari Warzone at the moment, so there's no reason to do them, really.
Why are they broken?
Mostly because the Caldari have ECM on their NPCs, and the Galente NPCs have sensor dampeners. Because of this, you can basically run around in a stealth bomber inside a Galente mission, killing NPCs against the Galente militia, complete the Plex in 5 minutes, make 70,000 loyalty points, go back home in your stealth bomber, cloaking devices and stealth bombers. Basically, it makes you invulnerable to anybody inside low-sec. So the Galente have to run around in Ishtars through gate camps in Ishtars. That just doesn't work. People start getting pretty wise to where the Ishtars are going through the Stargates, and then Snigwaffa or somebody else camps the Stargate and then kills the Ishtar. So not much you can really do about that. You have to use a ship class that's 8 times more expensive and 3 times the signature radius, and doesn't have a covert ops cloaking device to do the missions as Galente. They need to be fixed. The missions need to be fixed. So in the meantime, basically you're living in low-sec at the mercy of pirates, war targets, anybody that comes along, and you don't have any way to make money to replace your losses unless you're doing these boring game mechanics. So perhaps an infrastructure upgrade that allows you to get access to more dead space sites, more exploration sites, more things like that. For owning that system and upgrading it with your loyalty points, that might be interesting to some of our players.
I think that's definitely true. Personally, I think that the Caldari had a bit of a disadvantage, even though their missions are easier, simply because Galente own like 2/3 of the low-sec agents they have, just because we're living in their systems. So they don't have quite the same advantage. I think that's actually why you don't see the same massive shifts back and forth in Warzone control in the high tiers, is because of the control of the low-sec agents that we've got. The Caldari just don't have the same incentive. I think that, making systems more valuable to live in. The other thing I think that's going to make things really interesting in faction warfare is the introduction of citadels, because once you can get those in a low sec, and if you can anchor those in low sec, faction warfare low sec at all, that's going to massively change the dynamics. Because right now, if you capture the system, the bad guys can't dock. If they can drop a citadel, now they have some place that they can dock, that they can hand out ships more easily, that you can store a lot more ships in than in a pause. It massively simplifies your logistics. And I think that really is going to change the ability of attackers to be able to mount viable assaults on defended systems. If you're talking about trying to put in mechanics where plexes are harder to take, the defenses of NPCs are buffed in upgraded systems, I think that would be interesting. I think that would also massively decrease the casual farming in home systems and kind of make it a little bit easier to keep them, which would be kind of a nice little quality of life thing. But I don't think it's going to change things in a defended system assault sort of scenario. Just because if I got 10 guys in frigates, I'm going to be able to kill whatever you have in a novice plex, for example. And in those situations, it's really the players on the defending side that determine how difficult it's going to be to take that system, which is, I think, kind of how you really want it to be. Would I like to see some sort of incursion mechanics in low second faction warfare space? I don't know that it's necessary to do that. I think the bigger things are going to be incentivizing people to live in the war zone, doing something about the tier and the mission system, which we talked about quite a bit in the last episode, episode 7. Maybe even decoupling the tier system from the upgrades and making it solely based on how much of the war zone you actually control. Because under the current system, the tier that you're at is almost entirely dependent upon how much you want to upgrade the systems. For example, you as Galente, you can have the entire war zone and still be at tier 1, or you could have half the war zone and be at tier 4.
Yeah, I think the tier system is really borked in a way that the numbers are quite too big for differences. And I think especially tier 1 shouldn't be a punishment. I think it should always be benefits. And also you should get always the maximum LP payout for a kill, like the equivalent of a tier 5 LP payout. So, in order to drive combat and drive PvP, which is what this is about.
Absolutely, and that was mentioned last week as well. So I think I think we should get together in like a little Google document with all our proposals and just dump that into CCP's head and just have them do it, because I think that would probably benefit things substantially.
I think this is a great time to plug the tweet feed Slack, and there's actually a channel in there called New FW that has a proposal document where CCP is monitoring, kind of taking ideas for the next faction warfare system. So please go ahead and join up and contribute on that.
Okay, so I do have possibly the most important question of this 2-episode Crossing Zebras TV show. Des, as an Amar militia player, how is your group dealing with the rise of the Space Pope, Maximus something or other I'm not Mittens, I don't fucking know it. Against the residing Empress Jamal, I think it is. What is the feeling in the Amar militia about this rising civil war?
We'd like to get paid. It doesn't matter who pays.
I think the Mittani would pay substantially more than, Jamal Sarum, so you may want to switch sides there. Yeah, just all that technician from the 8 years that they had those moons.
I mean, as long as the new Space Probe doesn't outlaw hot chocolate milk orgies, I'm fine.
Okay, well, we have a ton of announcements to begin this week. Firstly, humongous shout out to Eve.8.com. They are supporting Crossing Zebras even more. They've increased their sponsorship to us, and as part of such, we are looking for more writers. You can find the details on the CrossingZebras.com website. Xander and Nidin are looking for more talented writers to write for staff. If you don't have to write the type of stuff we're currently doing, as long as it's Eve-based, as long as it's good, just send in your application with some writing material. As I said, details are on the site. Secondly, other things I have to mention. I've now forgotten all of them. Fantastic. Great. Okay, yes. So we've just finished our... Well, we're about to finish our 2-episode series on faction warfare. There will not be a show next week. We are going to be trying to do it fortnightly. We just kind of had a 2-week special here. And the show in 2 weeks' time, I'm hoping, will be on the Entosis module in nullsec. So a big change of scene from what we've been discussing for the past 2 weeks. The Entosis module have been out for about maybe a week and a half since then, possibly, in terms of usability, or a week or something like that. So we'll try and get some nullsec dudes on. If you're a nullsec dude and you've been using your Entosis module, or for any episode of Crossing Zebras TV, if we announce a topic and you think, oh, I know a lot about that, I'm really interested in that, I have a lot of ideas about that, I'd like to talk about it, feel free to get in touch with me. It's very important to me that this show focuses on specific topics that each of us do, and we get people on who are doing that thing in EVE, right? So this week we're discussing faction warfare. These 3 guys who've been kind enough to come on and show me the ropes of faction warfare are in faction warfare, doing faction warfare. There's not a podcast of the same 3 guys every week talking about subjects they don't know. It's really important to me that we're talking about knowledgeably what we're talking about, and it's not just some political jerk about how Brave is dying for the 11,000th time or whatever, you know. Anyway, enough of that rant, right? So again, thank you all for watching. Thank you guys for coming on, to Vesk, Jules, and Des. As I said, we'll be back in 2 weeks' time with an Entosis episode. I have this horrible feeling I'm forgetting something. Guys, please do your shout-outs while I try to think.
All right, so I think I'll start out. I'll go ahead and give a shout out to Sugar Kyle, who's probably been the best low-sec faction warfare CSM representative we've had for the past 2 years. Hopefully she'll run for number 3. She's fucking awesome.
Begging her to come on the show, but she keeps blocking me. I don't know how to bribe her. What does she want? How do I get her on the show?
I don't know. I can talk to her. She's local, so we'll see.
Yeah. And by the way, I just want to give a shout out also to Sugar Cow. She was fantastic at FanFest. We talked to her for hours. I think we lost half of the day just because we were talking to Sugar Cow about LowSec. Also the Galente Militia, GMVA, Moira Corporation. Cheers to all.
You're silent, Des.
Des, go.
Yeah, cheers to our militia, to those who are left at least, which are not in MCF1B, and a big shout out to my alliance. It's been fun. If you want to get into Amar militia, you will probably look at us at one point. So if you want to get into faction warfare, come to us. We are the best around.
So yes, once again, thank you all 3 of you for coming on. Thank you everybody who's been watching. Thank you for the stream chat. Thank you for the comments and the discussion. If you have any topics you think it would be awesome that we covered, please feel free to let us know in the comments of the show, or email Apothne in game. I'm really interested to hear criticism, feedback, all that stuff about how making this show more interesting for the viewer is. As I said previously, I'm trying to make it different than other EVE shows that are going around, but I'm up for criticism, suggestions, all that good stuff. Again, thank you for watching. Thank you guys for coming on. That is Crossing Zebras TV, episode number 8, Faction Warfare Part 2. We are out. Goodbye.